Alright, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back. It's me, Addy, again, and I hope you guys are doing A-okay. The other night, I finally completed my very first playthrough of Elden Ring over on Twitch. Granted, I do still have a lot of side quests to complete, many bosses to beat, and of course, other builds to try and endings to unlock to snag all the trophies and 100% the game, which I fully intend on doing. But I feel like I'm now at the point where I've experienced just enough of the game to provide a strongly informed opinion of it. I mean, hell, we pretty much just rolled the credits the other night, and so here we go. Without further ado, here's the review for Elden Ring. It's been a long time coming. Now, Elden Ring is a game that I took my sweet, sweet time with. I refused to rush this playthrough, and that should be apparent by the date that I'm uploading this review, which is pretty long after the game came out, I think a little over a month. But I intentionally play the game at as slow of a pace as I possibly could, because the first run-through of any Soulsborne game is always going to be your most magical, and I wanted the experience to last as long as I possibly could. And I'm so glad that I made that decision because Elden Ring was an absolute pleasure to play through. This game is nothing short of a masterpiece, and I really do mean that in every possible meaning of the word. Because what Hidetaka Miyazaki and From Software have done here is they've taken every single element that made the previous Soulsborne games so amazing and have thrown them into this full-fledged open world setting for the first time in the franchise. And they executed that perfectly. This is how you iterate on a massively successful franchise and take it to bold new heights by honoring and retaining the best of the series while treading new and more ambitious territory. Elden Ring keeps the masterful level design, brutally punishing yet rewarding combat, spectacular boss fights, mesmerizing music, and of course the trademark cryptic yet thoroughly intriguing storytelling of the previous Soulsborne games, all while offering the player a grand and expansive new open world to explore. And the open world here isn't like a mini sandbox or semi-open world or anything like that. No, this is the full-fledged real deal made with so much goddamn confidence by From Software. And going into this game, I'll be honest, I was expecting an open world more along the lines of, say, Ocarina of Time as an example, where yes, the world is pretty open for the most part, but a majority of the content lies inside of the various dungeons and temples you'll go through, with the world serving as a walkway between each area. But Elden Ring is quite the opposite. Here you'll spend around 85% of your time exploring a vast open world with so many goddamn incredible areas and unique locations to explore. All the while using the various dungeons, castles, and more, all of which keep the amazing tight and interwoven level design of the previous games as walkways in between each large swath of land. So instead of being an Ocarina of Time, this is straight up a Breath of the Wild, except bolder and better in my opinion. The approach to open world design itself is handled flawlessly, and I'm honestly freaking shocked as to how From Software were able to get it so right on their first attempt. I think one of the best aspects of this open world in this game, that dare I say not a single game in the genre has been able to execute as well as this game does, is just this sheer feeling of wonder, pride, and excitement all at once upon discovering new locations and things. I don't think this game ever once held my hand. It doesn't hold your hand at all, nor does it force you to go in any particular direction when you play. There's no journal, no quest log, it's just you and the sprawling world that awaits you. And besides just a few NPCs that may give you vague tidbits and clues as to where to go or what to do to progress the story, it's really up to you at the end of the day to explore the world in whatever way and pace you see fit. And what that does is it makes finding new locations, secrets, characters, and so much more feel so incredibly rewarding. Something that few open world games are able to achieve to the degree that this game does. You discover everything in this game through your own hard work and exploration, which is phenomenal. And once you get to the stage of the game where there are markers all over your map of the places you've been to, you feel this immense feeling of just pride and satisfaction knowing that you found all of those things yourself. Unless you used a wiki. Did you? Did you? I totally did, god damn it. I'm just railing on myself right now. And it certainly helps that the locations themselves are absolutely gobsmacking, awe-inspiring levels of fantastic. I'll never forget the time that I came across this unsuspecting structure in the middle of a forest that ended up being this grand mystical lift that took me on what is probably the longest elevator ride in Soulsborne history down into this large, huge, fucking sprawling underground city, revealing that beneath the open world is another open world of itself. Dude, that is forever going to go down as one of my favorite memories in gaming. There's honestly so much in this game that I will forever and always remember. I just love this game so much. I think the fact that there's just so much going on in the open world and how every few seconds something new is grabbing your attention that leads you to discovering something incredible is what ultimately sells the game for me. And very rarely do concepts or locations ever get recycled in the game. With the exception of maybe the tombs and catacombs, almost nothing is ever reused, enemies included. I was honestly so surprised at how many new enemies and biomes I was encountering during my playthrough, just when I thought I'd seen it all. There's just so much variety and novelty to the open world here, and that is ultimately what makes this game so goddamn amazing. And besides just the open world, Elden Ring also excels in the familiar areas of a Soulsborne title as well. The levels are intricately crafted with several secrets, shortcuts, and more, all of which make them so addicting and fun to explore, which is nothing new there. I mean, the other Soulsborne games do that really well too, in my opinion. I think the greatest and strongest aspect of these games is the level design, and the combat mechanics are also very fun here as well. Out of all the Soulsborne games, I would say that this one feels the most like Dark Souls. In fact, I'd go so far as to call this a Dark Souls 4, with how similar it is to the other titles. But even then, there's just so many new ways to play and engage with the game now. For one, there's now horseback riding in combat, which is incredibly fluid and has been beautifully implemented overall, and also small snippets of Sekiro DNA in here as well, with how you can now jump and sneak around enemies. It all meshes together so well, and when you pair that with all the new builds there are to explore, it makes for the most versatile and replayable Soulsborne game ever. Me personally, I went with a build that some might honestly call boring, but at the end of the day was really fun for me. I never even touched the magic on my first playthrough, instead opting to go for a more classic strength build with 2 heavy, giant, clunky, colossal swords and heavy armor to tank and spank throughout the game, which was super duper fun. See, my first playthrough of these games has always got to have a slow and heavy strength build. It's this silly little tradition that I have set for myself. And I've got to say that Elden Ring is probably the least forgiving of all the Soulsborne titles towards this kind of a build, given how fast and speedy the enemies are and how slow you swing. In fact, I'm not gonna lie, it got to the point where I was downright disappointed that this classic build was gonna pretty much be non-viable in the game, but thankfully, that all changed when I discovered summoning, a brand new concept in Elden Ring where you can conjure a variety of these awesome spectral spirits to come and distract the bosses as you fight them, and that gave me the much needed room to be able to get my slow yet heavy and clunky and powerful swings in on the enemies. And that reassured me that any build you go for in this game is viable after all. Some other parts of the game I want to mention that were amazing were the boss fights, the music, and the lore. I think that with every Soulsborne game, From Software adds more cinematic flair and grandiosity to every boss fight, and Elden Ring couldn't be a clearer example of that. The bosses in this game are so good, not only from just a gameplay perspective, but also in terms of sheer presentation. Their visual design, music, lore, and even the pre-rendered cutscenes that play before some of them just make these fights so epic. Honestly, man, sometimes they're too epic, with how they're so good that they mesmerize you and cause you to forget that you're even fighting a boss, which, let's be honest, isn't really the best thing in the world. They're so much more pretty and delicate and dead. Fuck, very dead. I can't even be mad though. I can't even be mad. Half of my attention is just on the OST and the music. I'm not even able to concentrate properly because of how mesmerizing this fight is. Holy hell. This game is something else, man. But yeah, the perfect example of everything I'm talking about here is, in my opinion, Starscourge Radahn, who was literally the biggest boss ever designed in a From Software game, with the most exciting and tense build-up to a boss fight ever. I also want to talk about the music, which, like I mentioned, is incredible in these fights as well. And I mean, let's be honest, the music never ever disappoints in any From Software game, but Of course, I'm just going to keep on talking about how good it is because these scores, man, this OST absolutely deserves it. And I think this time around what's really neat is that instead of only the boss fights having their own unique and amazing soundtracks, passive exploration and level traversal has music as well, which was previously quite uncommon in the Soulsborne series. And all of it is composed and suits the atmosphere you're going through brilliantly. To end things off here, I want to touch a bit on the lore and world building, because how can we forget those two things? Now, I thought those two things were done very well. I think the characters, their backstories, and what ultimately shapes the world you explore in Elden Ring were thoroughly intriguing. And even though in typical Soulsborne fashion, the story in Elden Ring is largely foggy and difficult to follow on your first playthrough, it was still definitely a lot clearer and more transparent than in most other From Software titles. I think if I understand this correctly, George R. R. Martin wrote a good chunk of the lore and characters of this world, and Miyazaki tailored it all to fit his vision and make sense within a Soulsborne-esque setting and game. And judging by what I played, their collaboration clearly resulted in something remarkable here. Granted, the quality of lore in a Soulsborne game will be subjective, and you as an individual might like the world and setting of one of these games over another, and in my case, I thought the lore here and the world building were very, very good. And I would honestly put my enjoyment of this game's story right after Bloodborne's. And since we're on the topic of Bloodborne, I feel like it's worth mentioning how I'd rank this game around that and even the rest of the Soulsborne games. So if you're curious, here's my top 3 now at this point after having played through Elden Ring. From my favorite to still games that I absolutely love but aren't in my #1 spot, it would go Bloodborne, Sekiro, and then Elden Ring, which might come as a surprise to you. Here's the deal. Bloodborne and Sekiro will forever and always be my top 2 favorite games in the series because of what they mean to me personally, but if I were to look at things a little bit more critically, I can absolutely acknowledge that Elden Ring is the greatest game that From Software has ever made. Dude, it is literally engineered from the ground up to be that way, with how it perfects everything that made its predecessor so good and adds even more on top of that. Miyazaki and everyone involved in this project have outdone themselves. They've clearly perfected a beloved subgenre that they've crafted over the past 10 years, and this game is the epitome of that. They should be proud. I can say with confidence that Elden Ring will win Game of the Year, and I'd be very surprised if it didn't. Hell, it's not just Game of the Year, it's Game of the Years. I do firmly believe that this game has revolutionized open world gaming and will continue to influence the next generation of the genre. I'm giving Elden Ring a 10 out of 10. It is From Software's magnum opus, one of the greatest achievements in video games, and a landmark title that will forever be remembered with fondness and overwhelming nostalgia. Thank you so much for watching me gush over one of the greatest games I've ever played, you guys. Like I said earlier, there's still so much for me to do in this game, and even though I rolled the credits for it for the first time, I still feel like I haven't even scratched the surface yet with it. So come join me on this ongoing journey over on twitch.tv/irritableindian, and also look out for more Let's Plays of our Elden Ring playthrough here on my YouTube channel. I'll see you guys again soon, but until then, keep on keeping on.